Welcome to Alan Skorsky Reports. I'm Alan Skorsky. October 7th, 2023 was not only a turning point for Israel and the Jewish people, it became the real reveal about the West's morality. Support for Israel and empathy for a nation who suffered the most vicious and barbaric attack in its history was a fleeting moment. In the streets of America, Canada, Australia, and Europe, supporters of Hamas terrorism, including Marxists, marched in support of the attack and condemned Israel before Israel even set foot in Gaza. Following the electoral victory of Donald Trump in 2024, a new vile element of anti-Semitism arose from the right, especially from former conservatives like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. And lest anyone think that the haters of Israel and the Jewish people only come from left-wing Marxists or radical right-wingers, Jewish leftists from Code Pink and Jewish Voice for Peace, along with the fringe group Neturei Karta, also enthusiastically lent their support to the enemies of the Jewish state. All of this and more make today's guest even more important as a voice for moral clarity. Hungarian-born Virag Gulyas, hope I'm pronouncing your name properly, is a former diplomat to the EU, communications consultant, and journalist. She is also the New York City coordinator for End Jew Hatred. Virag is a survivor of 2 terrorist attacks in Europe, which gives her a candid and raw perspective of global security and human rights challenges. She served as the permanent representative of Hungary to the European Union during Hungary's rotating presidency and has been involved in the UN initiatives focusing on civil advocacy, education, and legal campaigns. In 2024, Hadassah named her one of the most influential Zionist women. Virag, it's an honor to have you, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly.
Hi, Ellen. Thanks so much for having me. And you almost got it right. With the Guyash, we can work a little bit on it. It's surprising how difficult Guyash is for pronunciation, even though it's the soup. It's like
okay.
The goulash soup.
I'm going to call you Virag. Is it Virag? Virag?
It's Virag.
Virag. Okay. Virag.
And one little correction in the very humbling intro. I'm not the coordinator for End Jew Hatred anymore, but I was that, and it was a great time of my life, and they continue to do great work. I'm just not with them anymore.
Your legacy lives on. We'll leave it. That's how we'll say it. So my opening question for you is this. I'm not going to get into the whole, you're not Jewish, you love Israel.
Thank you.
One thing we have learned over the years is that our best friends are not Jewish, and some of our worst enemies are Jewish. Mm-hmm. So here, I'm going to begin from a different perspective. You're from Europe, a continent where anti-Semitism has always lived. And you began your journey towards becoming an activist for Israel, I believe, in 2017. You started a blog called Almost Jewish, and you became a real spokesperson, advocate for Israel and the Jewish people. So with all of the issues that a European could have chosen to get involved with, because Europe is replete with issues and problems, what drove you to say, I'm going to make combating anti-Semitism and support for Israel an issue that you want to become so involved and passionate about?
Look, we need to go back in time a little bit. It started in 2011, and it's no secret that I dated an Israeli while I was in Brussels. And that definitely has a pivotal moment in my life if I look back at it. The relationship is non-existent at the moment with that guy, so it's like in the past, but definitely the first piece of the dominoes. Right. And I'm often contemplating on whether my life would have turned out to as it is today if I hadn't met him. This is how life is. In hindsight, you can see those little pieces and what started something big in your life, and that relationship definitely was a huge factor in my life. He was the one taking me to Israel for the first time. And then since then, I went back 26 times. Out of that, half of them was like already alone on my own. So that is where it started. So that relationship taught me a lot about how Jews feel in Europe, even though he himself, for example, was not a religious person, he was not a practicing Jew. But when we toyed with the possible future together, it was already an interfaith relationship. Okay, where would we put our kids? To a Jewish school. Then I see the Jewish schools are protected by police officers and tanks at one point in Brussels. Where would we go today? The Jewish Museum. Oh, there was a shooting at the Jewish Museum. We go to a Maccabi soccer match, and in front of it, there are BDS supporters in Europe, in Brussels. So slowly but surely, I started to understand this vehement heaviness that is on you when you are around Jewish communities, even though if you are not Jewish yourself. And then with the years, it actually progressed to a situation where I was more bothered by it than he was. He felt like, okay, I did my duty in the army. Now I am in Europe and I'm gonna live a little bit of a more sheltered life. You can see that with lots of diaspora Jews actually who are Israelis. So this is not a singled out moment for him. But eventually I was the one, we went to supermarkets and the Jewish flags were taken out from the food sectors, the international food sectors. So I spent my time organizing that while he was shopping grocery for us, So I got very heavily involved. I never handled injustice well, and it started to hit home, closer to home, because I spent my days within the Jewish communities. And that was, coming from inside, like as a soul-gutting feeling that, okay, there is injustice. And then as the relationship progressed and eventually died, my journey just went further, deeper into that. So much so that eventually I earned a master's degrees in Jewish studies, because I didn't want to be that girl who is just talking for Israel or about Israel just because she dated an Israeli. I like to challenge myself. I like to learn more of what I believe in. Obviously, I needed to challenge my own beliefs. I grew up, I wouldn't say, with the hatred-driven anti-Semitism, but definitely on the stereotypes against Jews. That was just the nature of business in society, and still is in most part of Europe. So that is how it started. And then when I moved to New York City, I was doing this master's degrees. And besides that, I just got very active on the ground as well. And eventually all my work just also was around this topic. So I worked with Jewish nonprofits, helping them as a consultant in communication, digital media. And then, as you mentioned, with anti-Jew hatred, organizing on the ground. So my last 10, 12 years has been all around this.
So it's interesting because people are going to hear this and they're going to say, okay, you ended the relationship with the Israeli guy. You could have easily have said, you know what? I hate Israel now.
Well,
These things
as
happen. I don't know
traumatic,
what the relationship was like, but okay,
traumatic.
it became a springboard for you. So that's great. Um, and I'm sure I hope he was a nice guy. Hope he was very nice to you.
Well, my friends often joke with this, what you just mentioned, that I actually should have been an anti-Semite after.
Yeah,
But it's people are people
right.
regardless whether Jewish or not. So the
Yeah,
relationship
yeah.
was traumatic, but it was a
Right.
catalyst for me for something else.
Okay, so let me ask you another question. In 2017, as I mentioned in the monologue, you began the blog Almost Jewish. So again, I could see Jews and supporters of Israel being drawn to you because for us, again, it's a new thing. Someone who's not Jewish supporting us, that's very exciting. Um, were you a diplomat at that point already? And if yes, how did your colleagues respond? Because for Jews, yes, it's a novelty to have you come out and support us. But for Europeans, it's like, seriously? You're going to go and advocate for them?
So I was already living in New York City. So no, I was not
Yeah.
actually employed by anyone at that given point. But the truth is that while I was still in Belgium, at one point I was looking for a job. And I'm never going to forget that. That was another pivotal moment. I went to the interview and a woman told me that you would have better chances at interviews if in the language section and the volunteering session, you would take out everything that is related to Israel. And I was like, I went to the park and I was having a conversation with God.
Right.
And I was like, I don't think I can do that. Like, how could I work at organizations where I can't openly talk about going for a vacation to Israel or something of that
Right.
sort? That's like, no. My integrity was always very much the path forward for me. That always showed me how I want to live in this life. So basically, I made a decision there, and I knew that doors will close in front of me if I continue being an outspoken ally to the Jewish
Right.
communities. And I also understood that probably doors will open, and that is exactly what happened. However, what I didn't count with, because you said that the gimmick name of Almost Jewish, which actually just came about it was really just a play for me because I always felt that, okay, how come that I'm so strongly, attached to the Jewish community? So I did a DNA test, and there
Right.
is not even 0.1% of Ashkenazi in me coming from Eastern Europe. That's like, come on,
Right.
God is really funny. And then I didn't believe that. I hired a person who checked my family tree. I paid all my savings to that guy. I was like, I want to know nothing Jewish related. So for me, it was just a play on the words and the gimmick, but I got a lot of pushback from Jewish communities, to be frank.
Pushback.
Yes, they really didn't like it. There are Jews, for I can even empathize with that, but many people are very suspicious of
Right.
non-Jewish people, especially when you are Christian. So I stopped saying I was Christian because when I moved to the US, they started to attack me. Oh, you are just one of those evangelicals. And I didn't even know what that meant
Right.
because in Eastern Europe, we don't have that. So I
Right.
was like, okay, I can't really say that. So I just went with the non-Jewish adjective. But yes, I did get a lot of backlash, even just for the name.
So it's interesting because I will tell you that our best friends in the world are the evangelicals. And if not for them, and listen, I say it, and you know what? As an advocate and activist myself, I slam the Jewish left because they have done more harm and damage to us. Listen, one of our best friends, Douglas Murray, Colonel Richard Kemp, Muhammad
Yeah, both
Hassan
are
Youssef,
amazing.
and I can go on the whole list. So those people who, well, whatever it is, let's not, we'll use this, we'll have it for another conversation. Um, the president of Hungary, Viktor Orban, he's very different than the other leaders. He's not like a Macron or a Keir Starmer or whoever London keeps changing over leaders over there, because he has got no patience or tolerance for this Islamist and jihadi immigration, whereas the other countries have. And so, and other than, let's say, in the UK, you've got someone like a Tommy Robinson, for example, that's
Yeah.
very active, okay? But I don't see Tommy Robinson types anywhere else. So, like, where do you see? I mean, like, here's what I always say to people. In America, you have a right to like or dislike anybody you want. Tucker Carlson once said that it's immoral to dislike Jews for being born Jewish. I disagree with him. Disliking Jews for how they're born is not immoral. It's stupid. It's childish, not very intellectual. Immoral is lying about Jews. So
Hmm.
I look now again at Europe. You don't like Jews, your history is anti Semitic, fine. But would you rather have the Jews there and the Hasidim who dress funny and have beards and wear black hats? Or do you prefer the Islamists with their no-go zones attacking people who don't dress properly, people who walk with, I mean, seriously, what is the mindset in Europe that they have let themselves become into something that in their wildest dreams the Jews never would have done to them? What's
Look,
yeah,
the question is complex and it has layers to that.
right,
So first of all, Europe, I feel that it's often a mistake that we do, especially from the States, that we look at Europe at large. Europe is not one big country. We
right,
have dozens and dozens of sovereign nations with very different histories. My country is 2,000 years old. Then you have the Benelux states, couple hundreds years old. So it's not comparable.
right,
However, so there is the big divide between West and East. Always been there, probably always gonna be there. So what happened during the Holocaust and the Shoah, obviously the Eastern side was where anti-Semitism really flourished. However, what I always mention, it doesn't mean Western Europe liked these Jews. They just did it in very PC. They put their Jews on the train and sent them to the East, and then they washed their hands. And that I often feel it's unfair and unjust towards the Eastern Europeans. Yes, the Eastern Europeans had the camps, and we had the largest Jewish population. Hence, the tragedy is more palpable there. But the West is not, they are guilty as well. They cannot just say, okay, we were not part of this. How is it now? I do believe after the Shoah, now in Hungary would be a whole different topic, because there are also nuances that I'm not sure we have time to get into. But when people
Sure.
talk about anti-Semitism in Hungary,
Yeah.
knowing history is a must. What happened after the Holocaust? Many Jews found refuge in communism, in socialism. So what happened in Hungary, that many Jews changed names and they became part of the regime. So they were okay with the communist regime. And so many Hungarians have only one experience with Jews, and that is that was the Jew who reported about me. So it's nuanced, and you need to be very intelligent to understand these nuances. So when a Hungarian person never met a Jew apart from the neighbor who was reporting on him, and because of him, his family got into trouble, if you're not paying attention, you're going to generalize on Jews, and anti-Semitism just flourishes again. However, today, what we see in Europe is that Eastern Europe becomes the safe haven. And then the whole level of anti-Semitism shifted to the West. And the type of anti-Semitism changed as well. Whereas during the 1930s, it was more like the stereotypical driven Jew hatred, coming from, no. It's just like this very good old, the Jews are different, they have the big nose, and we need to get rid of them. That is based on absolute stupidity, for the lack of a better word, but that is what happened. Now, anti-Semitism in Europe has a different coloring, and that is an ideologically driven hatred. And that was brought in by the heavy Muslim population, that especially from 2015, when the big illegal immigration tsunami entered to Europe, they didn't stop in Eastern Europe because we are not rich enough for them, to give them the social benefits that they wanted. Also, our language in Hungary is pretty difficult, so we were not a final destination to them. But France, Belgium, Germany, the UK, that is why we see the level of anti-Semitism absolutely skyrocketing for the last dozens of years now because of that. And there is a huge difference, because in Eastern Europe, I won't lie, anti-Semitism is there. It's still there, but it's more in verbatim, okay? So people would still believe the conspiracy theories that, Jews rule the world. But to believe in that, you really need to be a very unintelligent person at this point of life. With the help of internet, you could figure out a lot of things. But instead of learning, you go on Reddit and read this story. However, so it's verbatim, but you're not going to see a Jew being beaten up in Hungary or in Poland or in Croatia or thrown out of the window or stabbed.
Right.
But in Western Europe, that's unfortunately daily occurring.
Yeah.
So there is this huge divide. And you mentioned Orban. Look, part of a big chunk of the Jewish community is not liking me as an ally simply because I support Viktor Orban. So, that is part of my story as well. It's not only not easy to be an ally because of all the hatred you get for that, mentioning Zionism, Israel, and the Jews.
Right.
But also within the Jewish communities, there is a big group of people who, regardless of my allyship, they will just, despise me. So the amount of hatred I'm getting is
May I
simply
say
because
one thing?
of that.
Just one thing, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I really hope that this is not something that you even give a second thought to. Donald Trump is the best friend in the history that the Jewish people in Israel have ever had. And those who hate him, and I mean this, they're leftists, their loyalty is to a false ideology. Their loyalty is not to anything that resembles Judaism. And I have news for you. They despise me, as much as they despise you. So I will tell you that you are on the side of righteousness. Never, again, don't even call them the Jewish community. They are leftists, and that's where their loyalty lies. They are Jewish when it's convenient for them.
Right.
Okay?
These are
So,
things you can say more openly than I can, because then, I get in trouble, which I'm not opposing to.
yeah,
I really stop tiptoeing around this topic
yeah,
because this is, part of the journey.
yeah,
But, just to give you one example, not to victimize myself,
yeah,
but just a day on Christmas night, I got a message from an anonymous Jew who wrote me a whole essay about how I am lying, how I am just doing this for this, and I'm like, it's Christmas night. How
right.
insensitive you need to
Yeah.
be, to spread your hatred on me. So these are just,
These are
part of the
leftists, and I'm
journey.
telling you that conservative Jews like myself, maybe not me because I'm not famous enough, but Ben Shapiro, okay, he's a famous enough. Mark Levin, Jewish conservatives like them get attacked by Jewish leftists.
Yeah, for
Consider
sure.
it, I'm telling you, take it as a badge of honor. They are leftists first, and that's it. Don't even think of them as you're being attacked by the Jewish community. You're not. You're
For
being
sure.
attacked by leftists. Anyhow, I apologize for interrupting you. Continue.
Yeah, so this pretty much is something, I usually put on the table, because when the Jewish communities are asking why there are not more vocal allies,
Right,
because it's not an easy task to take on.
right,
As I mentioned, you get these, but people will like you for standing up for Israel, but the moment you say something, about Trump or
right,
ICE or Orban,
right,
your whole allyship is just thrown out of the window as if it never happened, because then they see you in a different lens, more on the political affiliated lens,
yeah,
and then it's just, another tragic story. And then back to Orban, for example, as you said, the lefties are everywhere. So we
right,
have a heavy Jewish communities and population in Hungary who are vehemently hating on Orban. And as a Jew, they cannot even verbalize that, okay, I dislike his policies. I'm not sympathizing with him, but thank you for keeping me safe
right,
as the Jewish community in Hungary. So when you can't even say that,
right.
then, as you mentioned at the beginning, you are your own worst enemy,
Correct.
because he has really gone into fire for the community, for the Jewish community, both
Yeah,
at the EU and at the United Nations,
right,
with the International Court, saying no
right,
to the rest of Bibi.
right,
So especially in today's climate, I'm not saying to be, appreciative every day. We don't need that, but at least don't go against him
right.
like crazy.
Again, your support from the Jewish community comes from those Jews who are proudly Jewish, proudly pro-Israel. Okay, the ones who are not proud, they have their own issues. So their attacks on you are really because they don't like themselves. So they assuage their guilt by attacking you. And I'm telling you, you're 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 with us. A few more questions for you. Again, on Facebook and on social media, you do these you will go to protests and demonstrations and you'll ask people questions. And there was one recently where you confronted these Jewish leftists, okay, accusing
Have
Israel of
fun.
genocide. Huh? Okay. Uh, so of all these interviews that you've done, which one, if any, has like shocked you the most?
Look, it's been 12 years, and interestingly enough, I always had a different strategy than most people. Like, it's very difficult to stand there with people who despise you and
Right.
scream at you. I got spat on, and you just stand there. And my strategy has always been to be the calmest person and don't scream back, don't
Right.
yell back. I understand that it loses its social media virality effect if I'm not screaming back,
Right.
because the big drama sells better. But I like to stay calm because I believe that eventually that can make a difference. And
Right.
I did have a couple of occasions when the person left with the notion that you made me think. And I believe that those are for me the most memorable ones, because then I feel like, okay, we achieved something.
Right.
And there is always a baseline. Look, I'm not going to argue with a absolute stupid person in front of me, but I see that there is zero common denominator there.
Right.
We always need to arrive at one point to the notion that Hamas is a terrorist organization. If we can
Right.
agree on this, there
Right.
is something to work on and build on. But if we can't even agree on that,
Right.
I just move on. So the person you mentioned, he was protesting Trump's peace committee meeting, which was in DC.
Right.
And obviously they were out with their signs that Israel is committing a genocide. Trump's peace plan is just, again, oppressing the Palestinians. And when I ask them questions,
Right.
obviously I could have debunked each and every sentence he was saying, but
Right.
psychologically that is not working. You need to choose your battles. So I let him speak. I let him say
Right.
his little spiel.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I ask back. And when I ask always, like, what should Israel do? Because they can't answer that question.
Right.
So they don't have a solution, but Israel must go. I was like, what does it mean Israel must go? Israel should not exist?
Right.
And like, these are the questions when you put back, and maybe one of them will think that person, I'm not sure he thought about it after, but it's always it's a lottery whether it leads somewhere.
So here's what's interesting, and I've noticed this, okay, especially with October 7th. All these people bashing Israel, they don't talk about October 7th. Ask them who Kfir Bibas is. They can't tell you the 10-month-old baby boy who was kidnapped with his 4-year-old brother
Yeah.
and mother and strangled to death at the hands of Hamas. They'll never talk about it. They won't talk about all the posters that they ripped down. So they only talk about what fits their narrative. So there's a lot there, and that's what scares me. And this leads me to, I guess, my last question for you. Donald Trump is the most consequential leader in my lifetime. He has 2 years left. We don't know what comes after him. Um, if it's J.D. Vance, I'm very scared. Even if it's not J.D. Vance, we see though what's happening on the right. In
Mm-hmm.
your opinion, again, and I still think I'm somewhat of an optimistic person because I was always very positive. Said, but I don't see. I think that America's best days are really behind us because
Mm-hmm.
of the rise of the hardcore left and now the normalization of the anti-Semitic right. What do you do you see do you think I'm wrong that no, we really there is a pendulum, it'll come back, or do you see that there is a breaking point and when it hits that point, then we're screwed?
Look, I wish I would have the future teller ball in
Right.
front of me. First of all, I hope for Rubio. If we can,
Yeah,
Marco Rubio, I think would be a more assertive choice
right,
for the future. I often say that there is this pendulum that has to come back and bounce back eventually, because if you look back in history, that's what happened. It always goes back and then goes to the other side, and then we have a couple of good years, and now we are maybe over of that couple of peaceful years, and now we are going to one side very much. But honestly, if we would turn off social media for a month, I am sure we could achieve so much. Look, social media thrives on division.
yeah,
And even the well-intended influencers on both spectrums are falling into that trap, because otherwise they don't stay relevant.
right,
It's extremely hard to keep your integrity, say what you want to say, but don't go into sensationalism. I am vehemently against the Muslim migration to Europe. And yet, I am very cautious before I report something when there was an attack, because just because it was done by a Muslim, the intention might not have been that what they are reporting, just for, again,
right.
the sensationalist aspect, because that is dividing people again. And I think it's extremely big of a mistake. But at the end of the day, that pays. It literally gives thousands and thousands of dollars to so many influencers.
Right.
So this is why I do believe that social media is one of our biggest enemies when
Yeah.
it comes to uh, polarization, but also the rise of anti-Semitism. And obviously, let's be frank, in New York, it really doesn't help now that we have a mayor who is already, as the last days of examples show,
Right.
positively discriminating Muslims.
Right.
They are almost repeated a Boston Marathon bomb
Correct.
attack, and then he's excusing them and he's putting the highlight only on the right-wing
Correct.
influencer.
Yep.
That is what I call soft jihad, when you have these Muslims in very influential positions, like being a mayor or judge or a principal at a school, and then you just give green light to this kind of behavior. And that is exactly what we see in London,
Right.
that actual British people are put in jail because they posted something on social media that is deemed anti-Muslim.
Right.
And yet Muslims are committing crimes and they are not facing,
Right.
the jail time. So I think it's very dangerous. I'm not sure I can answer your question. I do hope and I do believe that there is the pendulum that's gonna bounce back. But honestly, my country is facing elections in a couple of weeks. And even there, my fear is there. So what we are seeing is that the opposition of Orban is imagine a Mamdani guy multiplied by 10, not because he's Muslim, but it's the same game plan,
Right.
the same selling a utopistic dream, and the young people are eating it up because they don't know anything else but Orban. They have never experienced anything else.
Right.
So it's easy to mislead them with those promises. So we have a big, election ahead of time, and I'm very nervous about that as well, because whereas in Western Europe, people are bouncing back towards a more conservative policy, and you can see that the elections are again leaning more and more and more towards the right. Hungary didn't experience the last 10 years of Western European chaos. We had it good because of Orban. And I'm afraid that now they want to just go down that path and then bounce back. So honestly, I believe in the pendulum. I hope it works.
There'll be another conversation. Virag, it was an
Perfect.
honor. As my sister-in-law said, Chadosh, you are right. You are
Chodash.
wonderful, right? Chadosh. I said
Thank
it
you.
properly. Okay.
Chodash, yes.
Chodash. Okay. And Kisenem. Thank
Köszönöm.
you. Yeah, I'm doing good.
Chodash.
Okay.
Chodash.
Thank you so much for joining us. And again, it's an honor and continued success in everything you do. And remember, you are one of us.
Chodash. Thank you for the opportunity here.
Thank you.